Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Chemical weapons inspectors in Syria are to be given access to an alleged chemical attack site on Wednesday. That's according to the Russian government. The team has been in the country since Saturday, but has been denied access to the site in the town of Duma. American officials have raised concerns that Russia may have tampered with the site while inspectors were denied access. Well, to discuss that, I'm joined now via webcam by Faraz Shahabi. He is the MP for Syria's second largest city, Aleppo, and is a supporter of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Faraz, welcome to the programme. There is significant evidence from multiple sources of a chemical attack that was unleashed on people in Duma. Do you deny that happened?
Absolutely. Well, there's a significant evidence that this was a hoax. Bear in mind that the OPCW was in Syria and visited on November 22nd, 2017, the very same facilities, the chemical storage and research facilities in Barzeh and Jamaraya, and they issued a statement on February 28, 2018, just like a couple of months ago, saying that there's no evidence whatsoever that these buildings that were hit 2 days ago ever work with chemical weapons.
Right, Faraz.
This is the OPCW.
Right,
itself.
But hang on. The 500 patients, an estimated 500 patients, presented to health facilities, exhibited signs and symptoms consistent with exposure to toxic chemicals. We saw pictures that showed children whose faces were wet, they were choking, and the sources on the ground, eyewitness accounts and sources on the ground, say and concur that that is consistent with a chemical and chlorine attack.
Actually, that is a big, huge, fat lie, because I quote Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk is a reputable British journalist, independent journalist, who was just there in Duma right after this claim, with a bunch of other journalists, by the way. And he went to the same clinic, and he talked to the same medics, and he talked to other witnesses. We also, our troops were there at the time of the attack, alleged attack.
And did he talk to people who support the regime? Did he support?
No, it's not about the regime. Listen, ma'am, please. This is the attack. The US, UK, French attack was not an attack on the regime. It was an attack on my country, on Syria. This is one. Second. Why didn't this army, the Syrian army, use the chemical weapons when they had them before they were dismantled in 2012, when they lost Duma, when they lost Eastern Ghouta? Why would they use them one day, only one day, after the Duma terrorists agreed to get on the buses and they started leaving? Why would they use this after victory?
Right, but you do see that many of the residents in Duma are terrorists that must be eliminated in your mind.
No. The terrorists, jihadis, the Al-Qaeda-linked jihadis that were in Duma for 6 months, that kidnapped women and children. By the way, only 200 civilians now. 200 civilians were released from Duma prisons. I don't know if you ever taped a video this or showed this to your audience. One of them was a girl who was kidnapped when she was only 8 months old and released when she's 4 years and 8 months old.
All right,
her name is Judy.
Okay,
listen to me, please. Let me finish my point.
Yeah, go on.
Let me finish my point. 20,000 of these terrorists agreed to get on the buses and left to northern Syria and to Idlib. The remaining civilians of Duma remained in Duma. Most of them are telling us horrible stories of being abducted for 6 years by the Islamist radical jihadi rule in Duma. Please,
okay.
Which is an enclave only 2 miles away from our capital.
Okay, you've denied that there was any chemical attack. But if that's the case, why has the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons been kept waiting for so long to enter Duma and do their work?
This is absolute nonsense, because we are the ones who asked for these organizations to come.
So why were they delayed?
No. The delay is we had nothing to do with any delay. By the way, they are there. In fact, now look, please, in 2013, we were attacked with chemical weapons, and we lost 21 or so soldiers. And we asked the UN to send an inspection in 2013. We don't have chemical weapons. Journalists are free to go to Duma. You know, our army was surrounding the area.
All right.
Are you suggesting that we have holy powers to control the wind factor from all directions, and not to hit any of our soldiers?
Right.
Not
Well,
to hit
why?
any terrorists, by the way.
Why is it then that your
Not
allies?
one single
Hang on.
terrorist was injured with this chemical attack.
Let me put this question to you.
Helmet fabrication.
Your allies, the Russians, have said that Britain staged a gas attack. If that is the case, your allies are confirming that there was a chemical attack, even though they're saying...
Maybe there was. It was fabricated by the White Helmets. Guess what? The White Helmet was established by ex-MI6 guy. He lives in London, I believe. The White Helmets are Al-Qaeda's civil arm. Their job is to fabricate stuff. There are a bunch of terrorists wandering around. Everybody knows their fabrications. All
right, Faraz, thank you very much for joining us. Apologies for some of the sound breaking up there for viewers listening here. Now, here in Westminster, MPs have been debating whether the government was right to take part in strikes against chemical weapons facilities in Syria. There'll also be a further debate this afternoon. Let's take a look at the action from yesterday.
Let me be absolutely clear. We have acted because it is in our national interest to do so. It is in our national interest to prevent the further use of chemical weapons in Syria and to uphold and defend the global consensus that these weapons should not be used.
This statement serves as a reminder that the Prime Minister is accountable to this Parliament, not to the whims of the US President. We clearly need a War Powers Act in this country to transform a now broken convention into a legal obligation.
Once President Trump had announced to the world what he was proposing, a widespread debate was taking place everywhere, including many MPs in the media, but no debate in Parliament.
It was perfectly possible for the House to have been recalled in advance of Saturday's morning's airstrikes. Why was this not done? And what does this mean for the PM's position if there are further chemical attacks in Syria?
And that those who would turn a blind eye, who would do nothing in pursuit of some moral high ground, should also be held accountable for once today as well.
Unfortunately, it's clear that some of those who claim to support the introduction of a War Powers Bill actually wish to see the introduction of a No War Powers Bill, the main beneficiary of which will be countries and groups around the world whose interests and values are diametrically opposed to ours.
Well, as we said a little earlier, there is a further debate this afternoon. It's at the behest of Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, who wants to introduce a so-called War Powers Act. Well, joining me now to talk about that is the Labour MP, Chris Williamson. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Why a War Powers Act?
Well, I think the bare minimum that we require before we commit foreign troops or engage in a military airstrikes is the sign-off from the House of Commons. A precedent was set in 2003. As I understand it, every single military intervention thereafter has required sign-off from the House of Commons. You say it's required. It's convention. It's not constitution. It's not constitutionally. No, it's not constitution. That's why we are putting forward this War Powers Act proposition now, to make it a requirement. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I think it's deeply regrettable that we didn't get a parliamentary debate before the action took place, because what that's done is put responsibility for this entirely on Theresa May. We've woken up to newspapers today where she's had to deny being Trump's puppet. Had we had that debate, we would be talking now about the humanitarian crisis here, the fact that 3-year-old children are being gassed. We've actually stopped talking about the children now and talking only now about Theresa May and her relationship with the United States. But would you have supported the airstrikes? Based on what was presented, I would have done, yes, because I think, as you've heard in some of those clips, inaction is as dangerous as taking the wrong action, and I think, you know, if we're presented with evidence that we can destroy chemical weapons to stop any further slaughtering of children that have no opportunity to defend themselves or even take cover, I do think we have a responsibility to stop that, to do something about that. But I do think that it's a decision which should be taken with calm heads, having examined the detail in a parliamentary debate where everybody can come to their own conclusions.
And so would you agree with Kezia Dugdale and some of your other Labour colleagues that the party has a strong record, a proud record, said Mike Gapes, Chris Leslie, Mary Cray, of humanitarian intervention, and you would have supported those airstrikes to alleviate the suffering that we just heard from Kezia?
Well, I don't think the airstrikes would do anything or will do anything to alleviate the suffering. I mean, I've got three concerns: evidence, legality and motive. And very eminent people, much more eminent than me, people like Lord West, the former First Sea Lord, former General Shaw, the former commander in charge of British Armed Forces in Iraq, have actually questioned the motive. They don't believe that there was a sufficient motive to, if you like, generate this chemical weapons attack by Assad, because at this stage they have all
by
but
Assad.
one.
So you do agree it was by Assad?
Well, no, what they're saying is...
No, but you just said this chemical attack by Assad. No, so let's just be clear. Did he do it in your mind or didn't he?
I don't know. And the point I'm making is, and what they were saying is, they are not clear. They don't believe that Assad had a motive to indulge in a chemical weapons attack, because it virtually won.
Who could have done it? Who else could have done it?
Well, and there's also a question about whether indeed there was a chemical weapons attack, and we've heard...
So you don't believe, a little like I guess earlier, that there was a chemical weapons attack?
Well, all we've had... What all the Prime Minister was able to cite were social media posts and hearsay. I think...
No, she cited, not that I'm representing Theresa May here, but she did cite intelligence reports. We also had the French saying that they had pretty incontrovertible intelligence evidence. But you are questioning, A, whether there was a chemical attack in the first place, and if there was a chemical attack, was it President Assad?
All that's been put into the public domain, as far as I can tell, are social media posts and hearsay. Yes, they've cited... all sorts of other sources, but none of that has been put into the public domain.
So who else could have done it? That's what I'm trying to get from you. You must have an idea about who else could have done it.
Well, what people are saying on the ground is that indeed the Syrian MP that you spoke to, there's an article, I think, in today's paper by Robert Frisk, who's on the ground there, who spoke not just to the doctors at the location where the chemical weapons attack allegedly took place, also spoke to ordinary, regular people, all of whom are questioning whether indeed a chemical weapons attack took place. Now, I just think before we enter into a situation where we are committing airstrikes, potentially leading to a wider conflagration in the region, possibly pitching two nuclear superpowers up against one another, we need better evidence than was presented.
All right.
The bare minimum, therefore, should be that we at least have the opportunity for a debate in the House of Commons.
All right, but let's pick up...
I would have to...
Sure, let's pick up,
that.
because you've thrown obviously a lot of scepticism on the claims that have been made by the government.
Not just me, but Lord West,
no, but I've got you
Shaw, Peter Ford, not just me, various people are...
All right, but you're not hiding behind what they're saying. You believe it, you believe it too.
Hiding behind. I'm citing very eminent people.
Fine. So
military people who are
Who would have done that? Who would have staged?
Well,
who would have staged an attack like that? What would the motive have been? For whom?
Pull up a clip from Lord West speaking to the BBC.
Sure, but who do you think?
Well, let me quote what Lord West said. He said there was a very real possibility that the rebels might very well have staged something in order to bring in the West, because he's making the point at this stage of this terrible civil war in Syria, at this stage in the battle for Eastern Ghouta, where Assad's regime have all but won it. He is making the point, as is General Shaw, as is Peter Ford, and other people, other eminent individuals are saying, why would Assad, at this point in time, use chemical weapons which would be bound to bring on the wrath of the West?
Do you think there was a chemical attack?
I do, yes, but I'm listening hard to what Chris is saying, and I have sympathy with it. For example, the strikes at the weekend were on sarin bases, not on chlorine gas bases. So, you know, the nature of the strikes at the weekend isn't going to prevent another attack involving chlorine gas. So there's a very confused position coming from the government at the moment, which is about trying to do something, but not necessarily the thing that is necessary to protect the children and other vulnerable people.
Right, but you think there was a chemical attack?
I do, because I've seen the pictures. I've seen pictures of children on my television gasping for air. And that shocks me to my core. And, you know, I've just returned from a weekend in Bosnia looking at what happened when people denied the genocide there, when the international community failed to act. And it's still suffering 23 years on. That's very much in my mind, so I do think we have to take this very seriously.
I agree with you, and it's undeniable that there's terrible atrocities have taken place there. And, you know, let's put chemical weapons to one side. And, you know, and the West has used, like, white phosphorus, for example, in Fallujah.
But can you put chemical weapons to the side if you're not sure?
The point I was going to make is that conventional weapons are devastating and have devastated, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people, and has led to this mass refugee crisis.
Are you closer to the view of President Bashar al-Assad on this issue and Feraz, the MP that we interviewed, than Theresa May?
What I would wish to see is proper evidence. I'd like to see the OPCW being given the opportunity to do its work, and we know that the Russian military said they would give safe passage to the OPCW inspectors. But what we ultimately have to do is find a peaceful solution. And, you know, military
even though the Russians continue to veto any attempt.
Well, we still need to work hard. But firing missiles, potentially committing ground troops, military interventions are not going to bring about a peaceful resolution. That's what we need.
Chris Williamson, thank you.
The nerve agent used to poison the former spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter was delivered in liquid form. The government has revealed a very small amount was apparently used in Salisbury 6 weeks ago. A clean-up operation has begun to decontaminate 9 sites in the city, which will take several months. Well, Duncan Kennedy is in Salisbury for us now. And, Duncan, this will be a long and costly operation.
It certainly will. At the end of 6 weeks since this attack, we'd all had that speculation about what this Novichok nerve agent was. Was it a powder? Was it something else? Well, as you say there, Fiona, today officials confirmed that it was a liquid. We already know that the biggest concentration of this agent was found on Sergei Skripal's house, in particular on his front door and especially on his front door handle. But we hadn't known until now that it was a liquid. It's been confirmed as that today, and also that it was directly transferred from person to person and from item to item. We also learned today, as you say, that there is to be a big clean-up campaign here in Salisbury. It'll take many months and cost millions of pounds, we're told. It'll involve something like 190 military personnel across 9 sites, including this one here. They'll come in, take things away, incinerate them, or clean them on site. The council say, yes, we realise this is going to be a lot more disruption, but they say above all else, they want to get this right.
Duncan Kennedy in a rainy Salisbury. Thank you.
Now, new light has been shed on the nerve agent attack on former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The Environment Department has said that only a very small amount was used in liquid form to poison the pair, who were found unconscious on a bench in Salisbury last month. The government also gave details about the multi-million-pound clean-up operation in the city. Paul McNamara reports.
It's been here for so long now, it's fraying at the edges. And today we were told the police tape that crisscrosses this city will be there for months more to come. A massive clean-up operation is beginning to decontaminate 9 sites in Salisbury where traces of the nerve agent Novichok have been found. The highest concentration here at the home of former spy Sergei Skripal. The nerve agent, according to the Department for Environment, delivered in liquid form.
Government scientists also told us today that it was only a very small amount of this nerve agent that was used on the Skripals, and with every location they went to after making contact, the concentration level drops. Think of it, they said, like dipping your finger in a pot of ink, and every time you make a print on another piece of paper, the mark gets more and more diluted.
It's more than 6 weeks now since former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter were found slumped and unconscious. Last week, Yulia was released from hospital. Her father is said to be recovering more slowly, but is also expected to eventually be discharged. Treating the city will take months. The cemetery where Sergei's wife and son are laid to rest was tested thoroughly days after the poisoning. It's now been reopened. The Novichok nerve agent doesn't evaporate or disappear over time, but experts said they're confident intense cleaning with caustic chemicals will mean all sites are left as safe as they ever were before. It's a clean-up which will cost millions.
Government is doing this because it needs to be done, and one thing I think people should take as a reassurance is the time it will take. The agencies of government, DEFRA, working with the MOD and others, are doing this and they're doing it properly. It's not a quick clean-up job. This is a really deep clean to ensure that when the sites come back to Wiltshire, come back to Salisbury, they are clean sites.
Salisbury should be back to normal by Christmas at the latest, the council hopes, keen for the poisoning of the spy of suburbia to become just another small chapter of this ancient city's history.
Now, over the 6 weeks since the Salisbury spy poisoning, details of what happened and what was involved have emerged little by little. Today, it became clear the nerve agent used was in liquid form, so not a powder after all. Only a very small amount of Novichok was involved. But as for life getting back to normal in Salisbury, that won't be happening anytime soon. Decontamination is expected to last for months.
Weeks may have passed, seasons have changed, but the science suggests that these sites in Salisbury are as dangerous today as they were when the chemical weapon attack took place. Despite theories that it may have washed away, we're now told the nerve agent does not disappear. And, say officials, it was in a liquid form. Their research has also concluded that only direct contact with the Novichok nerve agent could lead to poisoning. So despite officers standing within inches of a highly contaminated door in the days immediately following the attack, they were actually safe. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia would not necessarily have known they'd been contaminated. But along with Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, once in contact, they all unwittingly helped spread it around Salisbury. Hence the need to clean up multiple sites.
It's not one treatment fits every site. Each site is an individual plan and will be worked through, but no site will come back into use until it is clean.
In all, 9 sites will need to be decontaminated. The Skripal's home, where the Novichok was delivered, is the most dangerous. The Mill Pub and Zizi restaurant are also a major concern, as is the park in the Malting shopping centre where they collapsed. The work will take months and will cost millions. In the hope of eliminating every residual trace of the chemical, police cordons will be temporarily expanded. That should give workers the added security they need to complete the task. Once removed, all waste will be incinerated, and perhaps only then can this city return to normal. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Salisbury.
And over the weeks since the attack, a few of Sergei Skripal's friends and former associates have begun to speak out. Now one of his fellow secret agents in Russia has told us he believes the chemical used in Salisbury was made in Syria. In his first TV interview about Mr. Skripal's poisoning, Boris Volodarsky puts the blame squarely on Russia. He believes Mr. Skripal was helping to supply MI6 with information on Russian chemical weapons.
He was a senior officer in the same secretive military intelligence unit which Sergei Skripal served in. Boris Volodarsky knows the dark arts of so-called special operations, and he says there's no question that Russia targeted his former comrade.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that it was the Russian side, the Russians.
How can you be so sure that this was the Russian state?
They had a motive, they had a weapon, and they had the reason, and they had the chance to do it.
But why was a retired Russian intelligence officer living in sleepy Salisbury suddenly targeted? Boris Volodarsky believes Sergei Skripal was helping MI6 to gather intelligence on Russian chemical weapons.
Novichok, the chemical weapon that poisoned Skripal, was produced in Syria, in the chemical scientific research center in Syria, which is called in the French one is SERS, which is near Damascus. I think Skripal's death and Syria are very much connected.
76 of the 105 missiles fired at Syria on Saturday hit the chemical weapons base near Damascus. Retaliation, he claims, not just for Duma, but for Salisbury as well. He says the nerve agent attack on Skripal was carried out by a specially trained team from the Russian Foreign Intelligence Agency.
They have specialized department, which is Directorate S, which is illegals, that is officers that are operating non-cover operations. And within this directorate there's Department 2, which specializes in assassinations abroad using chemical weapons and specialized poisons.
The date Sergei Skripal was targeted on is significant, according to Boris Volodarsky. The 4th of March was close to the birthday of Alexander Skripal, Sergei's son, who died in Russia in mysterious circumstances, but who's buried in Salisbury.
His daughter obviously knew that, and she was preparing to come to this country to be with her father on that day. So it was a known case that he would be doing on that particular day.
The day Sergei Skripal was targeted, according to Boris Volodarsky, was just part of a bigger espionage operation involving spies, Syria and chemical weapons. Angus Walker, News at 10.
Jeremy Corbyn has demanded a new law to give the House of Commons the right to vote before the government commits to any military action. In an emergency debate following the strikes on Syria last weekend, he said it was a matter of basic democratic accountability. In response, Theresa May said that could undermine the security of operations and constrain the military's ability to act quickly and decisively. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has this report.
The noes to the left, 285.
2013, the moment Parliament stopped David Cameron taking military action in Syria.
It is clear to me that the British Parliament, reflecting the views of the British people, does not want to see British military action. I get that, and the government will act accordingly.
In the wake of last weekend's missile attacks on Syrian military installations, Jeremy Corbyn demanded that a Commons vote ahead of military action must now be enshrined in law.
It is about democracy, it is about accountability, it is about making very serious decisions. That is what MPs are elected to do. And it would bind this government and future governments to that basic democratic principle on the most serious and crucial issues of public policy that we're ever asked to take a decision on.
There are situations, not least major deployments like the Iraq War, where the scale of the military build-up requires the movement of military assets over weeks, and where it is absolutely right and appropriate for Parliament to debate military action in advance. But that does not mean it is always appropriate.
Theresa May has used the military action in Syria to try to push back on a developing convention that Parliament must approve all military action. She and others in the cabinet and in the military were worried that this was hardening into a fixed doctrine that could mean almost no military action ever is authorised. The Prime Minister seems to be trying to move to a new rule. Parliamentary approval is only absolutely required if there's full-scale military action, like Iraq 2003.
I realise that for some in this House, and especially for those who've not had to do what I have to do, the attractive purity of a democratic principle that Parliament should always decide may still appeal more than the practice of how to ensure an effective military operation.
Theresa May had to leave today's debate to meet South Africa's new President, Cyril Ramaphosa. She argued that taking hours of questions from MPs over 2 days after the military action was the right way to hold her to account. And in a vote, MPs backed her view by a majority of 61.
Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by the Labour MP Chris Williamson. Mr Williamson, if you had had the chance to have this debate before the military action in Syria, would Jeremy Corbyn have voted for military action? Would you?
Well, I wouldn't have voted for military action. I don't think it was a sensible thing to do. It certainly wasn't in the national interest, contrary to what the Prime Minister and many Tory MPs are claiming. But,
well,
you know,
so
the House...
if not now, when children are being gassed, then when?
Well, that's a debatable point as well, isn't it? And we've heard the former First Sea Lord, Lord West, questioning the validity of the assertions. The former commander of British Armed Forces in Iraq, similarly. So there are very eminent military experts who are questioning the motive and indeed the evidence. And I think before we commit troops, or indeed before we agree to airstrikes, the very minimum I think we should have is irrefutable evidence, and I don't think we've got that. I think what we heard...
Well, how debatable is debatable? I mean, was the Duma attack, might it have been faked?
Well, what we've heard from the Prime Minister is the suggestion that they'd seen social media posts and hearsay. Now, clearly, if we're going to commit our forces, we should have better intelligence than that, it seems to me. We've been through the dodgy dossier which led to the disastrous war in Iraq, and we shouldn't be going around that route again, it seems to me.
Well, I'll come back to your hearsay point in a minute, but I just ask you again, could the Duma attack have been faked, in your view?
Well, listen, I'm not an expert, am I? It's all speculation. It's all speculation. All these parliamentarians are simply speculating. That's why we need irrefutable evidence. We know from Robert Fisk, a investigative journalist who's on the ground in Duma. He's spoken to doctors, he's spoken to people actually living there, and they're actually questioning whether indeed a gas attack took place. Clearly, look, the use of chemical weapons are absolutely appalling. And the whole war situation in Syria is dreadful and has been dragging on now for 7 years, and the human misery is beyond belief. But when we hear the Prime Minister talking about these airstrikes being a humanitarian mission, it reeks of hypocrisy, because when she was challenged to take more refugees who are living proof of the consequences of war, she refused to do so. That seems to me would be a more relevant humanitarian gesture rather than actually launching these airstrikes.
If a gas attack didn't take place, as you've just suggested or just floated,
well,
how do you explain those children with eyes streaming, gasping for breath? How do you explain that?
Well, what I'd recommend that you do, Cathy, is look at the report that was filed by Robert Fisk, and he spoke to the doctor. He said that they were suffering from hypoxia, basically a shortage of oxygen brought about by certainly military bombardment, which led to a huge dust cloud and a shortage of air. And people were suffering from the effects of that. This is what the doctor was saying on the ground. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm merely pointing out that there are question marks that have been raised by military experts, by people on the ground, by eyewitnesses, which seem to run counter to what the government is claiming.
Well, let's talk about what the government is claiming. Theresa May has claimed that a barrel bomb was used to deliver the chemicals. The regime helicopter was seen above Duma on the evening of April the 7th. Now, the Syrian opposition doesn't have barrel bombs or helicopters, and what's more, the Syrian government has a track record of chemical attacks. So wouldn't the Prime Minister be entitled to ask you, what more evidence do you want?
Well, again, it's hearsay, as I understand it, that the helicopter was heard overhead. And look, the use of barrel bombs, the use of all of these military hardware against the people in Syria, it's just dreadful. It's appalling, of course it is, and we deprecate it in the strongest possible terms.
But it's rather interesting, isn't it, that you're not prepared to listen to the hearsay of the Prime Minister, hearsay your word, but you are prepared to listen to the hearsay of the journalist Robert Fisk?
Well, it's not hearsay, is it? I mean, he's actually on the ground, isn't he? I mean, what the Prime Minister has cited and Conservative MPs have cited, as I've already said, Cathy, is social media posts and assertions about a helicopter being overhead. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, I don't know, and there might very well have been a chemical weapons attack, but what Lord West, what the former First Sea Lord and General Shaw have said is that it beggars belief that Assad, at this stage of the civil war and the battle for eastern Ghouta, would resort to using chemical weapons. And I just think these are very serious question marks, and therefore merit, do they not, a debate in the House of Commons, rather than the Prime Minister taking it upon herself to use the powers which certainly the Constitution currently provide for her to commit British military forces in the way in which she has.
Well, some of the
surely before we do that, there
own...
should be a debate in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, MPs are the people's representatives.
And
the
there has
people,
been
by
a
a margin
debate.
of 2 to 1, are
Mr. Williamson,
opposed.
there has been a debate, and your colleagues, Labour colleagues, have expressed the view that inaction of the sort that you advocate has allowed Assad, a murderous dictator, to be propped up in power. Are you content with that?
I'm not advocating inaction. What I'm advocating, and what I think the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, is advocating, is that we use our good officers and rigorously pursue a diplomatic solution. Look, even Winston Churchill, the great war leader, said, "Jaw is better than war." Ultimately, there has to be a political solution to this terrible crisis that has befallen the people of Syria. And it would be better, would it not, to use our influence to get all of the players around the table to hammer out a negotiated settlement.
Chris Williamson, thank you very much. John.